half an hour away from Old Saybrook in Durham, on June 25th, 1967, a man saw two cigar-shaped objects in the sky. Robert Luca watched from behind the wheel as two smaller objects came out of one of the bigger ones. The dots of light flew away, one east, the other west, over top his car. Closer, he could make out that these smaller objects were discs, dull and metallic. They disappeared in the distance, descending like a falling leaf. When he turned around, he found himself at Hamden Beach, which was where he was initially driving to. He looked down at his watch. It was 2 p.m. He had no memory of what happened in the last 3 hours. Undergoing hypnosis years later, Robert was guided to remember more upsetting information. Being nude in a room lit indirectly by a bluish-white light. The floor was white. Being on a table. Two figures standing at his head and feet. They had large, bald heads, no noses, and tapered faces. An hour away from Old Saybrook, in Avon, two separate, unrelated witness groups saw a robot-like creature standing on the side of the road on September 3rd, 1967. It moved slowly and stiffly, seeming to try and stop the cars passing by. It was clothed in a single silver garment, which covered its hands and feet. On its head was a dark helmet. Both witnesses called the police, who found no evidence of anything out of the ordinary. The next day, the police received a second call. Two women saw a robot on the side of the road, in the same spot. The call came in at nearly the same time, only 15 minutes later in the day. As the witness's car approached, the robot turned and looked at them directly, standing in the middle of the opposing lane of traffic. It moved, expectedly, robotically, was wearing a piece of clothing that covered its hands and feet, and its face was concealed by a dark hood. Cars swerved around it as it trekked across the road and disappeared. An hour and a half away from Old Saybrook, in Winsted, two teenagers, Ruth Passini and Carol Loop, were looking out of a second-floor window when something caught their eye on September 15th, 1967. In the distance, they saw an object about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. It was flying low over a field, dipping up and down. They described it as being elliptical in shape and as glowing white, which turned to red, then back to white, gradually cycling between the two colors. The two watched for half an hour, their mothers eventually joining them. Then, they heard a noise. It was a puttering sound, like what you would hear from an old lawnmower starting up. The noise was coming from the barn, which sat about 50 feet away. Staring at the building, they saw two figures sprint from its door. The humanoids ran to the road, standing off to its side. From there, they looked up, staring at the house. After a few minutes, they ran across the road, standing near the home. The creatures were under 4 feet tall. One of them had a much bigger head than the other, disproportionately bulbous. When a car passed by and engulfed them in light, the UFO over the field dimmed, and the two entities ran back across the road. They were shortly joined by a third small figure. Together, all at once, they ran away into the darkness. UFOs were seen elsewhere that night and throughout the following week. A second sighting in Winsted, on February 21st, 1968, a girl had an encounter. It began with a strange sound, a bloop bloop. The 12-year-old looked outside and saw a white egg-shaped object. It was large, about the size of a car, and it hovered next to the railway station. A light beamed downward from the UFO, but didn't touch the ground. Then, between 15 and 20 little men exited the ship, walking down the ray of light as if it were a bridge. They were about 3 feet tall, wore silver clothes, fishbowl-like helmets, and walked in a single-file line. Once they reached the end of the light beam, they jumped off and onto the earth. One by one, they climbed up the side of the railroad station, like army men up a rope. Now on the roof, they dispersed in different directions. Frightened, the girl ran away from the window and hid in her bed. 11 minutes away from Old Saybrook, in Westbrook, sometime in November 1971, a woman saw a silvery object pass over her on the highway, landing in an adjacent swamp. It was so close to her that she could see windows on the UFO, so close that she could even see inside the windows. Within, there were several figures, but she couldn't make out any clear details. Afraid, she rushed home, feeling sick to her stomach. Coming through the door, she looked at the clock. It was 5:02 p.m. She glanced at it again. It was 5:20, and her husband was at the door. The loss of 18 minutes greatly disturbed her. About an hour and 15 minutes west of Old Saybrook, in Norwalk, on a summer night in 1973, a woman was driving when the radio started breaking up, playing only static. Changing station after station, they all screeched with loud interference. Then a man's voice began speaking through the static. Suddenly, she was no longer sitting in her car, but standing in a strange craft in front of a tall man. He was about 6'4", with lightly colored hair, dressed in a metallic one-piece jumpsuit that had a triangular emblem on the chest. Around him were at least 200 other entities, going about their own tasks. He stared at her, his mouth not moving. Yet, she heard his voice inside her head. He said, "Welcome, my friend, Mary Angel." He told her that she was being studied and would continue to see him like this at regular intervals. She was brought to a room full of machinery. Inside were screens, things like computers, a constant humming, vibration, as well as a view of outer space. The man pointed, telling her they were looking out at the Gwentatori L-Phi galaxy. He also told her that numerous floods would soon occur. Blinking, she was back in her car. Time had jumped forward 20 minutes. Yet, she was still in the same location. Nearly 2 hours away from Old Saybrook, in Kent, on September 12th, 1973, something odd happened once again. 2 17-year-old boys were driving when they saw flashing colorful lights in the sky. Looking up, there was also a large oval object. They pulled over and watched it hover over the Housatonic River. As it spun in the sky, several more teens showed up, joining them. The craft eventually descended behind a ridge. While it was no longer visible, its glow shined over the hilltops. A group formed to find a better view. As they drove around, a dozen smaller lights appeared, flying in a circular pattern over the ridge. Then, suddenly, they formed a line and traveled north, seen by a multitude of other witnesses throughout the area. The teens tried to follow them back, but lost track of the lights. Seeing a car parked on the side of the road, they stopped and asked the 2 girls inside if they had spotted anything unusual that night. They said no, but that they were waiting for a group of hikers that had told them an hour earlier, elsewhere, that they were traveling over the mountain and should meet them here. Then, out of nowhere, a group of 15 to 20 figures came jogging down the road, the same direction the teens had come from. Each hiker wore a helmet with a light on it, like an old miner's hat, and carried poles or rods in their hands. As they traveled down the road, the group incoherently mumbled and chanted, running in 2 columns. As they passed by, the teens shouted questions at them, but received no answers or acknowledgments. Rounding a corner, the teens hopped back in their car and followed. Making the same turn, the road and hillsides were empty before them. Several people were interviewed about this night by ufologists. 3 from this story were questioned. All claimed to experience a loss of 2 hours that night, happening immediately after encountering the hikers. During this chunk of time, they couldn't remember what happened or what they did, waking up at home. One of their watches had malfunctioned, sitting at 11:20 p.m. A hypnotist tried to have a regression session with the teens, though claimed their inability to recall more was due to a mental block being placed inside their memories. Less than an hour away from Old Saybrook, in Hamden, 2 teenagers had an alien encounter on January 11th, 1976. Bobby, age 14, was walking to his friend's house in the falling snow when he saw something strange. About 400 feet away, near some bushes, there was a floating, glowing figure. It had no discernible face, and the back of its head was flat, wavy, like corduroy pants. Only visible from the waist up, the light coming off of it reached far above its body. The glow's outer reaches had a less luminous, more silvery shine. Running to his friend's house, he gathered Glenn, age 13, Jerry, age 16, and a .22 rifle. Returning to the site, they saw the creature and shined their flashlight on it. When the light touched it, the entity fell backwards behind a ridge. Before it disappeared from view, the light illuminated more details on the creature. It, in fact, had no facial features, nor did it have a neck or arms. Pointing the flashlight down at the ground, the creature returned, rising up from the ditch. It remained in view, even when faced again with the flashlight. After a few seconds, the being slowly ducked down behind the ridge again. When it peeked out from the bushes, Jerry shot at it twice. He missed, aiming too high. The creature dodged away a third time and wasn't seen again. Even more unbelievable, aliens were seen a second time in Hamden about a month later, on February 10th. 2 teens, Gray and Barnett, were walking up Denslow Hill when they heard something crashing around in the neighboring junkyard. One yelled, "Who's there?" The noises changed. It was no longer the sound of metal scrap being tossed around, but something running through the underbrush. A green light flickered on to their other side. There was a wide field across from the junkyard. Up on the hilltop, about 25 feet away, the boys saw 2 pairs of short legs shuffling across the road. They were wearing shiny, smooth, one-piece suits that were glowing a purple color. The boys estimated that the alien's waist came only about 20 or 22 inches above the road. When they cautiously approached, a bright white, lemon-shaped light appeared 15 feet off the side of the road, blinking. It floated gently up in the air, flying at a diagonal angle across the road, avoiding power lines. When the little craft reached a fairly high altitude, it paused. The UFO blinked with 2 red lights, then zoomed away, never to be seen again. About the same distance away from our original story, in Cheshire, on March 5th, 1976, a family saw a UFO about a few thousand feet away from them, above the trees. The craft was very large, about 80 feet in diameter. On top of it, there was a translucent dome lined with gold lights and topped with a flashing, deep red light. Below, there were holes where blue lights beamed. The craft descended lower in the sky, floating just above the swamp behind their house, hidden among a mass of foliage. They watched it and waited for 2 hours. Then, they decided to make a move. 2 of the sons and their father hopped in a van, driving to get a closer look. As they headed down the road, they noticed something strange. It was unnaturally quiet. Nothing, not even the birds, were making noise. Finding no gaps or ways to get closer in the vehicle, they gave up and returned home. But when they got back, they discovered someone had gone missing. Their mother. Frantically, they scoured the house, checking every room, every closet, and the yard. But she wasn't there. She wasn't anywhere. Then, she was. Standing in the middle of the living room, she stared. Then, slowly, she tried to speak to them, but she couldn't. Her words were impossible to understand, slurred and slow. Eventually, they made out a sentence. "I was in the bedroom." An hour later, everyone went to their rooms and tried to go to bed. Another hour later, the couple woke up. Somehow, they had switched sides in bed. Neither remembered doing it or moving the other. Then, they both immediately began to feel nauseous, incredibly nauseous. Getting up, feeling frightened, they walked around the house only to discover that the back door was wide open. They immediately called for help. The next day, a UFO investigator came by. Near the home, he found 3 wedge-shaped holes and several broken tree branches. A second UFO investigator questioned the family a few days later. They said they remembered more than they did the day after it happened, though it was all very fuzzy. They believed that in that missing hour, the one that took place after they laid down and woke up feeling ill, aliens had taken them aboard their spacecraft. The father recalled only one detailed scene. He was standing in a place like a cafeteria, where the things were eating. The aliens were wrinkly with whitish-gray skin, high cheekbones, tall foreheads, bald heads, and eyes 3 to 4 times the size of a human's. He remembered one of them looking at him with disgust, as if saying, "What are you doing here?" After a session of hypnosis, his wife remembered even more. She was guided to recall seeing several different kinds of aliens. Ones that were shorter, about 4 feet tall. Ones that were a little taller, between 5 and 5.5 feet tall, called the doers. Then there were the taller ones, 6 to 6.5 feet tall. The big ones had eyes like a cat, diamond-shaped and with a protective layer. When the pupils were thin, their eyes were speckles of yellow and green. When the pupils were wide, they turned completely yellow. Over the years, the family continued to report contact with these aliens, claiming they had become able to telepathically communicate with them after being probed. Connecticut has experienced a lot of weirdness over the last 100 years. Of course, more was to come. The state was part of the 1984 Hudson Valley UFO sightings, or, more commonly known, the Westchester Boomerang. Thousands of UFO sightings were reported between March 1983 and June 1984, in southern New York and western Connecticut's Fairfield County. People were seeing objects the size of a football field, in the shape of a V or a circle, and accompanied by those Christmas lights. Red, white, and green. The crafts could shoot straight up into the sky, hover for long periods, and they were completely silent. Things got heated when several guards at the Indian Point nuclear power plant claimed to see something on June 14th and June 24th in 1984. According to them, a 900-foot-long V-shaped UFO hovered 300 yards over the plant for 15 minutes. One guard claimed it looked like helicopters in formation. They recounted that a commander gave orders to pull shotguns on it, but the thing disappeared before anything could be done. The guards approached Philip Imbrogno, who was a ufologist for the Center for UFO Studies, a privately funded research group founded by J. Allen Hynek, a scientific consultant for Project Blue Book. Philip's investigation did not go over well. A Power Authority security officer, John Branciforte, actively dismissed the event as misinformation and hysteria, claiming that the guards were not armed with shotguns, nor were they asked to be. He also accused Philip of making the whole thing up, or, at least, taking what the guards said and stretching it dramatically. The New York Power Authority released a statement on the matter, saying that they believed the sightings were pranksters. They claimed that commercial and private pilots both frequently use the plant as a navigational landmark. It's easy to see, and there are no airspace restrictions. People who believed in alien UFOs, however, didn't trust this or take it as a reasonable explanation. Sightings and reports increased. Someone caught it on video, showing an object flying as its lights rotated counterclockwise, completely silent. Giant, rigid triangles with changing lights were appearing everywhere. Some even thought that these UFOs were giving them signals through the lights, telling them something, maybe letting those below know that they knew they were watching. Then, one night, a police officer saw the lights and decided to follow them. They led him to the Stormville Airport in New York, where the mystery was solved. The UFO was, in a way, a group of pranksters. A group of Cessna 152s flying in formation. The undersides and wings of the crafts were painted black, so they couldn't be seen from below. They were also equipped with bright, color-changing lights. Another officer came and spoke to the pilots. He claimed they got a big kick out of it all. They didn't get into trouble, nor were they asked to stop, as nothing they were doing was illegal. The Poughkeepsie Journal interviewed a pilot about the incident. He and the other pilots were testing their skills, flying in a V shape, using a rotating beacon and navigation lights. The formation might have appeared motionless because it was so wide and could be seen from long distances. They had began by practicing during the day until they grew confident enough to try it at night. They got very good at it too, flying in formation so tight that only 6 inches of space were between their wingtips. There was no evidence that the pilots were trying to drum up a UFO hoax. The media just ran with the story, blowing it out of hand. At first, the pilots were shocked at what was going on, but then they were amused by it all, calling themselves the Martians, changing up their shapes and coordinating their lights. Many ufologists were not satisfied with this trend of events or explanation. While some reluctantly admitted that perhaps some of the year's sightings were of these pilots, it was impossible that they all were. According to them, some of the lights seemed to specifically avoid being filmed. A few prominent figures of the community thought it was all too illogical for such a banal resolution. Some thought it was a government cover-up, the real lights belonging to aliens or some kind of secret U.S. government tech. Most of those who were upset by this lackluster conclusion and steep decline in UFO sightings were, well, UFO authors, those whose careers depended on seeing UFOs, believing in UFOs, not finding less exciting, more likely, more credible explanations for them. To close this episode, there was one more case from Connecticut, and this one is much more recent. On April 10th, 2012, someone called the police, reporting that something fell from the sky, landing in Bantam Lake. It was giant, the size of a whale, and glowing green. At first, the unknown caller was dismissed, but then a second report came in. This time, it was sent in from a state trooper 10 miles away in Warren. He, too, saw something big fall from the sky. This had happened before, earlier, in the 60s, but was described as a small, round object, bright red like a hot iron. It, however, happened an hour away south, on the Long Island Sound, near where many of the other alien encounters occurred. There's not a lot of information out there on this incident, the giant green whale of Bantam Lake. What I was able to find, however, was that while the lake had never been searched or dredged for anything related to the incident, there's compelling evidence that it was a meteor. Featured in a Connecticut Insider article, there are several quotes from astrophysicist Brian Koberlin. In them, he notes that meteorites can glow green when the iron nickel within them catches fire. Meteorites burn up as they enter Earth's atmosphere. They can also appear much larger than they are, seeming bigger, brighter when further away on the horizon. Much like how a full moon looks extra big in the sky when it's floating lower, near the horizon. But nonetheless, the moon is always the same size. It's just how we're perceiving it. An extra nail in the giant green whale's coffin, the sighting took place during the Lyrid meteor shower. So it just seems like the most reasonable explanation. It is apt that our final two alien cases have somewhat tidy endings. Most strange things have sensible, yet disappointing, explanations. So, do I believe aliens have flown over and landed in Connecticut, appeared before some lucky or unlucky citizens' windows, erased their memories and probed their brains? In short, no. As Carl Sagan wrote in The Demon-Haunted World, on so important a question, the evidence must be airtight. The more we want it to be true, the more careful we have to be. No witnesses' say-so is good enough. People make mistakes. People play practical jokes. People stretch the truth for money or attention or fame. People occasionally misunderstand what they're seeing. People sometimes even see things that aren't there. None of these stories are accompanied by evidence. No photos, no videos. No photos of burn marks or goop or injuries. Not even shadowy figures. Just, unfortunately, human accounts excitedly investigated and discussed by people who want to believe, infiltrated by pseudoscientists and those who have much to gain. We're not the most reliable bunch, even when we want to be, even when we try. Our memories are bad, fallible. We have perception errors, confirmation biases, selection biases. In fact, the formatting of these cases are an example of that. I've cherry-picked sightings that resemble Mary's stars, leaving certain details out as well as outlier data as a whole when it wasn't very interesting. For many of the cases, I haven't gone into the details, the reasonable explanations for them, the discrediting factors, the investigative errors and discrepancies, the bunk science, some of the really dark stuff that comes along with alien history and ufology. Instead, I've sorted and presented it all as entertainingly as I could. You may have also thought, still, it's strange how close all of these other alien contact cases are to each other. Well, that is also a bit of magician work. Connecticut is the third smallest state in the U.S. You could drive from one side to the other in about 2 hours or less, and from top to bottom in under an hour and a half. All of these sightings are close, not because they're connected or linked by anything, except being in the state of Connecticut. We're just really good at finding patterns, thinking of reasons why, even when neither really exists. While I believe aliens may be somewhere out there, in some form, I don't think they have been here, or are here, on Earth. I don't think any of us has ever actually seen one, or one of their ships. That's all to say, aliens, cryptids, weird stuff. It's neat. I like it. It's interesting. None of it has to be real to be enjoyed, which is good, because none of it probably is.